A common issue I find myself thinking about is the upcoming dangers and warnings of a second Cold War. Many different groups seem to be pushing each other to the brink of civility, and blows are ready to be exchanged, if they haven't already. In light of recent events, during the first week of August, many people on both sides are running to social media and posting about the upcoming calamity, blaming one group or another for starting the conflict. Times like these are the hardest to take a step back, and to look at the picture as a whole from your individual point of view. Even though groups are intended to gather individuals with similar interests, beliefs, and goals, I think that the events of the past few years are perfect examples of how groups of individuals are turning into people with a group identity. What I mean by that is, instead of people thinking for themselves about their beliefs, ideals, or goals, they are relying on their group to tell them what their beliefs, ideals, and goals should be, without them even realizing it. People insert their group into their own identity, instead of maintaining the individuality of their own person. Now I realize how presumptuous and generalized a statement like that seems to be, but I think the evidence for this is right in front of us. Social media itself is an ideological battleground of different opinions, which can be seen in the bio of individual profiles and in the conversations and posts made by people themselves. It is here that the flogging of individuals is publicized, and where the outrage mob can be seen joining in on a group criticism of a standpoint, without trying to empathize or understand the point the person was making, or where their thoughts originated from. A perfect example of this is with Neil deGrasse Tyson's post after the shootings in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas. He made the comparison of death averages of different causes over 48 hours to the deaths in the recent mass shootings. The point of this post that I noticed was to emphasize that people only notice things that are of a spectacle or brought to the forefront of news, and for people to be aware of other issues that can also be prevented. It was not to belittle the deaths of those in the tragedies, as some might say. Granted, I think he could have worded it in a way that would have made this point more clear, but I can see from his standpoint, that being a man of science, that his criticism was that of a logical and beneficial method, not one to provoke people in a negative way, or to disregard the events, deaths, or the emotions surrounding the tragedies. Instead of making arguments against the original point being made, or facing the initial problem itself, these people resort to name-calling, character destruction, and drawing baseless conclusions to avoid conversations of that topic. This is seen with large, influential people being degraded by many different parties, and also large, influential people calling for the degradation of different parties. Jordan Peterson, a professor and clinical psychologist, has gained worldwide renown from his lectures, debates, and interviews online. However, he has been called both a Nazi and a Jewish shill, among other things, by two diametrically opposed extremist parties. These criticisms, which are clearly inflated and obviously inaccurate in comparison with each other, avoided the actual topics that Mr. Peterson was talking about and bringing up in his videos and discussions. Slavoj Žižek, a political and cultural philosopher, as well as a psychoanalyst and professor who has spoken vastly on German idealism and Marxism, retracted his statements calling Jordan Peterson alt-right. Žižek stated in an address to critics in an article on thephilosophical.salon.com, "The leitmotif of my critics in mentioning the link between Peterson and the alt-right is that I am wrong, displaying my basic lack of acquaintance with what I criticize. Peterson is a radical liberal, worried about the threat that political correctness, identity politics, LGBT+, etc., pose to the freedom of speech and other fundamental values of a democratic free society. In locating him with the alt-right, I act as a politically correct and postmodern dogmatic, ignoring simple facts." Not only did Mr. Žižek take responsibility for his mischaracterization of Mr. Peterson, but he clarified what Mr. Peterson was actually addressing and what he was pushing forward. This show of respect to truth and to someone else's image led to one of the most powerful philosophical and political discussions of the 21st century. A year after this correction, both Mr. Žižek and Mr. Peterson held a public discussion for 2 hours and 45 minutes about happiness, Marxism, and capitalism. As shown by Zizek, in order to understand an issue, you need to think about the issue from all sides, and to see the arguments that others are bringing to the table. By doing so, a dialogue about the issue will commence, and solutions and ideas will be sharpened by criticisms and supporting ideas, making for a stronger solution for the problem itself. However, in order to properly understand what others are expressing, people listening to them must be able to repeat their thoughts to them in full clarity so that the person themselves can agree with it. Instead, when people do not fully understand what others are saying, straw man arguments can be formed. These arguments and understandings contort the point of that person, which can give a nonsensical twist to it, or can possibly pervert it to a stance which clearly benefits a different idea. When this happens, the discussion becomes diluted and the intention of coming to a reasonable and responsible solution becomes harder for those in the conversation. Also, when people swarm around a topic and insults are thrown left and right, chaos is formed, to the point of even losing the original purpose of the discussion, which is now turned into a verbal slugfest. When an issue gets out of control, as said by the rapper T.I., worst thing you can do is panic. If a conversation is starting to take a turn for the worse, try to slow it down and bring it back to the original point of discussion. By maintaining a calm demeanor and thinking about things critically and efficiently, you'll be able to solve problems faster and with more effect than with a band-aid solution that one might make in a panic state. This can be shown during a discussion with lots of personal or societal weight. Many issues become inflamed and mishandled when emotions and tensions are high, which only causes further division amongst people. These reactions are understandable, but that doesn't mean that they should be enacted upon or completely disregarded. To solve a problem, a clear mind, critical thought, and the intention of making a solution is needed. And when I said earlier that groups of individuals are being replaced by people with group identity, I did not mean that groups themselves are a bad thing, just that they are turning into something that they initially were not, and for the worse. Groups are a very powerful method to inspire change, especially much-needed change, in a society or culture. They are where individuals of like-minded thought and morals can express their ideas and bring forth issues to the rest of the populace with sharpened intellect and well-thought-out ideas. For example, we can look at the 1950s and 60s with Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. It was during this time that the Civil Rights Movement was pushing against the United States school standard of segregated schools, as well as the inhibition of black voters at a state and local level, and to truly instate the meaning of all men were created equal. With the start of his activism campaign and protests like the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. was able to accrue nationwide support over time. Martin Luther King Jr. proclaimed in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers." This imagery of a truly united and truly free United States of America swept through the minds of Americans that day and cemented the support and success of the Civil Rights Movement. However, people today often overlook how he protested and another seriously important point he made during the same speech. While addressing activists at his march on Washington for jobs and freedom in terms of the conduct of their protest, he said, "And that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the worn threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence." By keeping his protests peaceful and promoting the sincerity of the movement, Martin Luther King Jr. only further proved via personal conduct that his argument is one to be taken seriously and be given the due justice it deserves. The saying, "Violence begets violence," was said for a reason. Violent attacks and protests will only dilute the original purpose of why you started in the first place. This is not to say that those who act out violently should have their points disregarded. There is a point that originally made them start to protest, which can be completely valid, and it is only to the fault of their character that they use violence to push forward their opinions and issues. I believe there to be a very necessary change in how groups today conduct themselves, and how members of those groups act and think about many topics and issues. There are many reasons as to why someone would want to join a group: to not feel left out, to meet like-minded people, to gain the benefits of being in that group. But ultimately, I believe that the individual has to bear in mind what made them join that group in the first place. If it was due to like-mindedness, reconsider what about that group made you join. See if what made you join initially lines up with what is being enacted now. Also, consider the thoughts and ideas of how the group itself was started, and if those thoughts and ideas are being applied today. You might be surprised by the amount of forgetfulness large groups have towards their origins, and how their path has had a fall from grace. Some members of the LGBT community and of Christianity, as well as other large groups, fall subject to this. If you proclaim that love wins, and to love thy neighbor as I have loved you, don't spread and support hatred towards a group or groups of people, no matter their race, creed, sexuality, or sex. If you joined because you didn't want to feel alone, or you felt welcomed, consider if that group is enacting beliefs that you agree with. Another saying I'm reminded of is, "You are who your friends are." If they're acting in a way that you could not see yourself acting, you should reconsider the validity of that group in accordance to your being there. Just because they were the first group that made you feel welcome, or that you understood, doesn't mean they are the only group. Also, don't succumb to peer pressure and group mentality. If you find yourself changing your opinions every time a friend, family member, or group member speaks, are those opinions really yours? Whenever you change your opinion, bear it in mind and give it an extra thought as to if that change is due to your own understanding and conclusion, or if it is because of the person or people who said it. Integrity and standing up for what you think is right is what makes people like Martin Luther King Jr. and movements like the Civil Rights Movement successful and historical, even if that means forsaking a group or groups. Finally, you should always maintain your own individuality, especially in a group setting. In order to avoid an outrage mob mentality and have a productive group, individuals of that group need to think for themselves and frequently challenge that group's beliefs in ways that help build and expand the knowledge and understanding of that group. Instead of listening to what group you subscribe to, be it a political, religious, or social group, without any doubt or question of validity, you should investigate that group's beliefs, ideas, and understanding for yourself. This will not only deepen your understanding of the issues and beliefs you are concerned about, it will also strengthen the group as a whole, and sharpen the ideas and objectives of that group. By stepping out of the echo chamber filled with people who have the same exact thoughts and beliefs as each other, you will challenge yourself and expand your knowledge and wisdom. Individuals are what makes positive changes happen and give birth to new ideas, not mobs or human microphones. I just want to thank you guys for watching again, and to leave a comment down in the comment section below if you have any opinions or comments about this video. It took a little bit longer than expected to make, but that's my fault and no one else's, so I apologize for the later release, but hopefully you enjoyed it.